Senator Westerfield, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's talk about...
In my office.
Yes, in your office with all your chamber bats.
That's right. That's right.
So let's talk about Senate Bill 90. At the end of last session, I remember Senate President Stivers getting down on the floor and saying, we have to do something about this over the interim. We're going to bring in the pews and we're going to talk about this and find a way to make sure we're not incarcerating people when they need to be in treatment. And so now here we are in the 2022 session, and you have introduced Senate Bill 90, which has made its way through committee already. But that's a way to approach, it's a new approach to criminal justice reform, right?
It is. The process actually began 2 or 3 years ago, back when Chairman Petrie was my co-chairman in the Judiciary. And we started working on a bail conversation, and early on the conversation took a turn toward behavioral health and substance use issues. And the long story short, everyone agrees. From the far left, from the far right, the most hard-nosed prosecutor to the most soft-hearted defense attorney to every judge, everyone agrees that most of our prison population is suffering from some sort of behavioral health disorder. Substance use disorder is probably the one that takes the top spot there. But there are other behavioral health issues that need to be addressed, and a lot of these people aren't getting plugged into that care. And so Senate Bill 90 is aimed at doing that very thing. Getting folks assessed not by someone with the courts, not supervised by someone with the courts or law enforcement, but by a behavioral health expert, someone who's got professional training in this area to assess everyone that comes in, so long as they qualify, and to get them referred to behavioral health interventions of some kind. And for a length of time, not for some 30-day period, but for a meaningful period of time. There's also, very importantly, a vocational component. The biggest thing we can do to make sure people don't commit new crimes is to make sure they're employed when they get out of custody. And so if we can accomplish all that, this is going to be a huge success. That's our hope. It's a pilot program. It's going to cost some money, which I hope we can appropriate through the budget process, but we know, because we've seen this work in little bits and pieces here and there, if we can put all these pieces together, we can make a huge difference for the people that get to go through this program.
Absolutely, and that is the thing. Most people within this population do have behavioral or substance use problems.
Or both.
Or both, exactly. And we hear a lot more about bipartisan support of things like this. You're hearing more people on the floor of both of our houses over there about people that they know who have been through this,
That's right.
Family members, friends. But at the same time, when we talk about these issues, there's a lot of talk about who gets these type of treatments and who is involved in these new criminal justice bills. So what kind of level and what kind of offenses qualify for this?
Well, I think you can make an argument that it should be open to everybody.
Right.
But obviously, the more serious the crime, the less support there is for that. And the more likely you're not going to be out anytime soon. So we're starting at the low end. This bill, and it's gone through different permutations and versions, but this bill is open only to Class D felony offenders. You've got to come out of the pretrial assessment as a low risk to flee, a low risk to public safety. There are some other exclusions based on feedback from different stakeholder groups, but that's our core population of folks, and we've got no shortage of those folks. Now, we'll say pre-pandemic, our pretrial population was large, 7, 8, maybe even north of 9,000 people at any point in time that fit this Class D population. In mid-January, we were beneath 1,900. Administrative release as part of the Supreme Court's order, Kentucky Supreme Court's order, has let out a lot of folks, and I think with a pretty high degree of success. And this is still open to those folks too. You don't have to be in custody, but the bill does give preference to those people who are in custody. We want to make sure people have an opportunity to get into this. And a lot of these people have never had access to this care before. And a lot of these people may have issues that haven't been diagnosed before. And so the hope is to get them plugged into that care. If we can do that, we can prevent future victims. We can prevent future crime. We can stop that cycle before it continues again.
So let's say I get picked up for a Class D. And
that sounds likely.
It is, it's very. But what happens at that point? So I get arrested, but it's clear that I might need some help. So what happens if I'm in one of these counties that's in the pilot project?
Within the first 72 hours of your booking, a behavioral health provider or an expert as set forth in the statute has to come in and do an assessment. And they do these assessments all the time today. The court orders community mental health centers to do assessments all the time. So this is not new, but getting it applied to everyone that comes in that qualifies is new. It's a lot more assessments, but we're hoping to catch a lot of folks that otherwise wouldn't have flagged an issue. Because right now it only happens if the court or one of the parties asks. But you get that assessment within 72 hours. And sometime between that moment and hopefully as soon as possible, perhaps between arraignment and if it goes to grand jury before the grand jury proceedings and an indictment is returned, that timeline is not set. But after that assessment, you can get referred to a behavioral health program. There's a list of providers that will compete if there are multiple providers in a certain area, and you get plugged into that, and this is the tricky part, it has to be by agreement of the parties. The defense counsel has to agree, and they'll probably agree every time. The prosecution also has to agree. One of the biggest impediments here is the court can't be involved. They can have the case on their docket and review things, but the court can't order someone into this treatment. Medicaid won't pay for that if they do. And so it's got to be by agreement of the parties. And from there on, it's a deferred prosecution. The case just sits on the shelf. The prosecution, all the parties, and the court get regular updates from the provider. But it's really in the provider's hand at that point to make sure that this person is compliant and they're doing what they're supposed to do and they're showing the growth that they're supposed to show.
So let's talk about the cost and Medicaid. You know, you bring up a good point because your friend John Tilley always talked about how we're costing more to incarcerate people than we are, we spend more incarcerating than we do educating people. So, but this obviously treatment would be provided in this situation, paid for by the state technically. So let's talk about the cost of that versus incarceration.
Costs about $30-something a day. I forget what the value is right now off the top of my head today. Something like $30-something plus a day to house an inmate. The case management, which is the most expensive part of this bill, for those that are going to get case management by the behavioral health provider, is about $312 a month reimbursed. We have the behavioral health assessment that's done, costs anywhere between $100 and $200 per assessment. So we can house these people. We can do it and sort of do it easily and cleanly. It's what we're doing now for most folks. And it's simple and easy because we don't have to vote on it. Nobody has to think about it. We just know the bad guys are going away and they're getting out of our hair. But that's, the people that often vote no on criminal justice bills, I sit down and talk to a few of my members up here, my colleagues, and I ask, do you want your community to be safe?
Right.
Because I do. Do you want it to be safer than it is? Of course they do. Well, if we know that this path can keep it safe for a temporary time, and this path can keep it safer for a much longer time, and it holds a lot longer, I'm going to pick this one every daggum time. We know that correcting behavior is better than just holding people in warehouses and punishing them for a time. If we don't do anything else to respond to what's causing their issues, if we don't do anything else that responds to what got them there in the first place, right, all we're doing is keeping them off the streets for a while, and then they're going to go right back out and do what they used to do. If we don't make any effort to address the substance use disorders that are leading to their very poor life choices, if we're not doing anything to address their employment, if we're not doing anything to address their education, then what the heck good are we doing? All we're doing is warehousing them at great expense to counties and state government. We can do more and spend our money better and get a far better return on that investment that lasts and that actually does make our community safer. I don't know why in the world we wouldn't do that.
And recidivism is a key part of this, and as
it is,
the Chamber talks about all the time how employment is such a key part of all of this, to your point. And so talk to me a little bit about the job training / employment piece of the bill.
So within 30 days, and this has gone through different versions too, but currently as the bill is drafted, within 30 days of that individual being plugged into this treatment path, the Workforce Cabinet does an assessment on their vocational position, whether or not they could benefit from job training, maybe even job placement. One of the things the bill doesn't do, but is another big issue, and I've talked to Kentucky Chamber folks about this, and I've talked to second chance hiring employers around the state about this, and that's transportation. It's a huge impediment. We did include some recovery housing language in here that can address that if there's funding available for that. But all those bare essentials that we all pay for and provide for ourselves every day are huge in determining whether or not someone's going to break the law or not. And we have an opportunity to fix the vocational side, or at least meet that need as best we can. But if we can fix those things, if we can invest in those things to try to get that corrected, we make huge changes for the good to prevent these people from coming back into custody again.
This is so critical, especially at this point, because we're coming out of the pandemic, as we all are starting to talk about. And we've seen so much more overdose. We've seen so many issues that have
Yeah.
come about because of the pandemic, because of the isolation, because of the situation that people were put in. So this is more important than ever. So what do you think are the prospects of us getting it done in the 2022 session?
I think they're good. I think I'm not worried about. In fact, I've been in constant contact with Chairman Massey, who has been involved in this bill process as well and deserves just as much credit. He's already told me a couple of weeks ago he's already got a date set for the House hearing on Senate Bill 90. So I'm not worried about its prospects in the House. My concern is what happens down the road. This is a 4-year pilot. It's a pilot, so it's not a statewide program. It's going to cost money to invest in this, to move it statewide, should the data come back and show that it's as successful as we think it'll be. My concern is whether or not the legislature is going to have the nerve to do that. I think it's worth every penny we can throw at it, because the money we spend on the front end doing these sorts of interventions is money we don't spend on the back end housing them.
Exactly.
And that's an easy pitch for me to say yes to. It won't be as easy for my colleagues, but my hope is that the data from this pilot shows this is worth our investment in. And if it is successful, then 4 years from now or 5 years from now, whenever the pilot's done and we're sitting here, we can work on a budget that actually heavily invests in a statewide rollout of something like this.
Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want people to know about the bill or criminal justice reforms in general?
We're trying to do what's best to keep our communities and our state safer. That doesn't always mean doing what we've done for years and years and years. Sometimes that means doing something different and something new. And we know that this can work. We know that investing and intervening in this way is more effective and a better use of our money than just locking people up for a while.